Well, hello and welcome to this Good Friday meditation. Perhaps the simplest way of describing the events of Good Friday could be found on the symbols on my t-shirt. Starts out with God loving us with the heart. But then we thought we knew better and decided to cross out that love. But then God provided another cross, which is what we think about on Good Friday. But then we have to choose with the question mark. We have to decide what we're going to do about it, whether we're going to take on board his love for us or whether we're going to just ignore it. But the words of invitation come from the words of Graham Kendrick's song, Come and See. Come and see, come and see, come and see the King of Love. See the purple robe and crown of thorns he wears. Soldiers mock, rulers sneer as he lifts the cruel cross. Lone and friendless, now he climbs towards the hill. We worship at your feet, where wrath and mercy meet, and a guilty world is washed by love's pure stream. For us he was made sin, oh help me take it in. Deep wounds of love cry out, Father, forgive. I worship the Lamb who was slain. Come and weep, come and mourn, for your sin that pierced him there, so much deeper than the wounds of thorn and nail. All our pride, all our greed, all our fallenness and shame. And the Lord has laid the punishment on him. Man of heaven, born to earth, to restore us to your heaven. Here we bow in awe beneath your searching eyes. From your tears comes our joy. From your death our life shall spring. By your resurrection power we shall arise. The reading I want to share with you comes from Isaiah 52 and into Isaiah 53, the title of the passage being The Lord's Suffering Servant. See, my servant will prosper, he will be highly exalted. But many were amazed when they saw him. His face was so disfigured he seemed hardly human, and his appearance one would scarcely know he was a man. And he will startle many nations. Kings will stand speechless in his presence, for they will see what they had not been told. They will understand what they had not heard about. Who has believed our message? To whom has the Lord revealed his powerful arm? My servant grew up in the Lord's presence like a tender green shoot, like a root in dry ground. Like there was nothing beautiful or majestic about his appearance, nothing to attract us to him. He was despised and rejected, a man of sorrows, acquainted with deepest grief. We turned our backs on him and looked the other way. He was despised, and we did not care. Yet it was our weaknesses that he carried. It was our sorrows that weighed him down, and we thought his troubles were a punishment from God, a punishment for his own sins. But he was pierced for our rebellion, crushed for our sins. He was beaten so that we could be whole. He was whipped so we could be healed. All of us, like sheep, have strayed away. We have left God's paths to follow our own. Yet the Lord laid on him the sins of us all. He was oppressed and harshly treated, yet he never said a word. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter. And as a sheep is silent before the shearers, he did not open his mouth. Unjustly condemned, he was led away. No one cared that he died without descendants, that his life was cut short in midstream. But he was struck down for the rebellion of my people. He had done no wrong and had never deceived anyone. But he was buried like a criminal. He was put in a rich man's grave. But it was the Lord's good plan to crush him and cause him grief. Yet, when his life is made an offering for sin, he will have many descendants. He will enjoy a long life, and the Lord's good plan will prosper in his hands. When he sees all that is accomplished by his anguish, he will be satisfied. And because of his experience, my righteous servant will make it possible for many to be counted righteous, for he will bear all their sins. I will give him the honours of a victorious soldier, because he exposed himself to death. He was counted among the rebels. He bore the sins of many and interceded for rebels. Amen. And so I want to show you a series of symbols which remind us of what exactly Jesus went through. Firstly, the crown of thorns. In John 15, verses 18 to 20, Jesus says this: "If the world hates you, bear in mind that it hated me first. The world would love you as one of its own if you belonged to it, but you are no longer part of the world, because I chose you to come out of the world, and so it hates you. Do you remember what I told you? A slave is not greater than the master. Since they persecuted me, naturally they will persecute you. For if they had listened to me, they would have listened to you." When we suffer any sort of physical pain, emotional or psychological pain even, remember that Jesus has suffered before us, even on the head, one of the most sensitive parts of our bodies. Of course, this crown of thorns was used to mock Jesus. Instead of a crown of jewels and gold and riches, a crown of spikes and thorns for torture. Here's a crown for you, the crowd was saying. I wonder perhaps in what ways we mock Christ in the things that we offer either to him or in the way that we live our lives. This sign, Jesus King of the Jews. Elsewhere in John's Gospel, the words of Jesus and the conversation that Pilate had with him go as follows. John 19, verses 19 to 22. And Pilate posted a sign on the cross that read, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. The place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and the sign was written in Hebrew, Latin, and Greek, so that many people could read it. Then the leading priests objected and said to Pilate, change it from the King of the Jews to, he said, I am the King of the Jews. But Pilate replied, no, what I have written, I have written. Now, I don't know about you, but I suspect that in his heart of hearts, Pilate knew there was something special about Jesus. Of course, it's only a guess, but he comes across in the gospel narratives as being kind of reluctant to actually hand him over to be crucified. Maybe he knew he was King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Maybe he knew he would be in trouble if he didn't send him to be crucified. But when we think of signs and labels, how do we label people? How do we categorize them? How do we categorize or even label God, or put him neatly into a little box and say, that is how I define you, that is how you work? Sometimes those labels and signs that we give people and God are accurate, but I'm sure at other times they are not. Jesus, King of the Jews. Nails. Now these nails are just 15 centimetres, half a foot long, clean from wicks. Nothing very special about them. Roman nails were just scraps of metal chopped off the edges of larger pieces of wood. Not clean, and certainly not smooth like the outside of these are. John 20, verses 24 to 29 say this. One of the 12, Thomas, nicknamed the twin, was not with the others when Jesus came. But they told him, we have seen the Lord. But Thomas replied, I won't believe it unless I see the nail wounds in his hands and put my fingers into them and place my hand into the wound in his side." 8 days later, the disciples were together again, and this time Thomas was with them. The doors were locked, but suddenly, as before, Jesus was standing among them. "Peace be with you," he said. Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and look at my side. Look at my hands. Put your hand into the wound in my side. Don't be faithless any longer. Believe." "My Lord and my God," Thomas exclaimed. Then Jesus told him, "You believe because you have seen me. Blessed are those who believe without seeing me." So these nails which left those imprints symbolise not just the death, but the actual pain that Jesus went through. Sometimes we can feel pain in the most mundane ways, splintering our fingers, stabbing our toe against, the edge of a wardrobe or something. But imagine the pain of one of these through our hands, perhaps it was wrists, no one's quite sure, and through our feet. That is the love that God has for us. That is the love he has because it demonstrates and reminds us that not only was he prepared to die, but it was actually prepared to go through the suffering beforehand, the pain and torture, which tragically so many people go through before they face the actual dying itself. Jesus has been there. I don't know about you, but I find that of enormous comfort. Because this wasn't just pain that Jesus went through for us. This would have been agony. I have here a chalice and a paten. Chalice for the wine, paten for the bread. John chapter 19 verses 28 to 30 say this. Jesus knew that his mission was now finished. And to fulfill scripture, he said, "I am thirsty." A jar of sour wine was sitting there, so they soaked a sponge in it, put it on a hyssop branch, and held it up to his lips. When Jesus had tasted it, he said, "It is finished." Then he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. Of course, Jesus would have been very thirsty, I should imagine, on the cross, having been through the torture of being whipped, crown of thorns placed on his head, beaten up, punched, kicked, spat at, and then cruelly nailed to the cross. He would have had so little energy. No wonder he said he thirsted. But of course, what Jesus thirsted for, the crowd couldn't give him. So they ended up once again mocking him with wine or vinegar, wine that had gone off basically. Of course, Jesus was to have the last laugh, but it didn't feel like that at the time. Jesus was bullied. Remember that when we think of our situation and the way that we're sometimes treated by others. Again, Jesus has been there before us. But of course, the chalice and the paten, which I have here, symbolise something else as well, the bread and the wine that we remember this event when we receive the Holy Communion, which is our communion with God, our coming together with him. And so we go back to Maundy Thursday and think of the Last Supper, where Jesus said that in Luke 22, he took some bread and gave it to God, gave thanks to God for it. He broke it into pieces and gave it to the disciples, saying, "This is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." And then after supper, he took a cup of wine and said, "This cup is the new covenant between God and his people, an agreement confirmed with my blood, which is poured out as a sacrifice for you and me and everyone else." Jesus knew what was going to happen to him, hence those words from the night before. But I wonder what exactly went through his mind. Surely there must have been times when he thought, do I have to go through this? Father, is there any other way? We know they were some of his words he spoke in the Garden of Gethsemane. But on that cross he had 3 hours to think about it. 3 hours. In pain, in torture, and in agony. For you and for me. When I survey the wondrous cross, on which the Prince of Glory died, my richest gain I count but loss, and pour contempt on all my pride. Forbid it, Lord, that I should boast, save in the death of Christ my God. All the vain things that charm me most, I sacrifice them through his blood. See, from his head, his hands, his feet, sorrow and love flow mingled down. Did ever such love and sorrow meet, or thorns compose so rich a crown? Were the whole realm of nature mine, that were an offering far too small. Love so amazing, so divine, demands my soul, my life, my all. So God's love, our crossing out of his love, his replacing that with a cross of his own. What did the disciples choose? What will we choose?